Yeah, my name is Robbie McAlister, and I am working with the Bibles, Badges, and Business program with the National Immigration Forum and also supporting the Evangelical Immigration Table. And what we're doing today is talking about immigration. I'm excited that I've got with me my friend and colleague, Jamie Rogers, Pastor Jamie Rogers, who works with international students. He's also a pastor in South Carolina in the Southern Baptist Convention. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Jamie. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are and what you do right now?
Yeah, hey, so Robbie, man, thanks for allowing me just the privilege of being able to do this. Anytime I feel like I can help challenge people to and maybe think in different ways than they've ever thought before. Especially, I'm from South Carolina, grew up in small town South Carolina, and our worlds are we just run in the same circles so much where we very rarely have anybody from outside that's different than us come into our circles. So it's always good to be able to talk about these things and talk about how God has kind of changed my heart and life towards welcoming in the stranger into my life. I've been in ministry, full-time Christian ministry and pastoral ministry for 20 years, man. So
Oh, wow.
I am 43 this year. And so for the last 2 years, we've been working primarily with college students at the University of South Carolina here in Columbia. And but even before that, did pastoral ministry. Immediately before we started doing collegiate ministry here at USC, I was doing some missions work or not in, because you don't live in Long Island, you live on Long Island, New York. And so we were there for 5 years. And then before that, we were doing pastoral ministry and still get a chance to preach and teach in Baptist churches here in South Carolina. And so that's who we are. My wife and I have been married yesterday 20 years. And
Oh,
so
happy anniversary.
yeah, thank you, man. We celebrated yesterday. We have 4 children. Our oldest is 14 and then our youngest is 8. And so they just started actually school this week. My wife homeschools, and they started this past Monday, and the first week's going well, man. So that's kind of who we are and where we come from.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Well, let me ask you this question. How did you become interested in international students and in immigrants and refugees? I know you've been working in that space for a while. I met you and you were doing a lot with international students. Maybe you could share a little bit of your journey of what got you interested in that.
Yeah. Hey, so the I guess the ironic thing with me is I grew up in South Carolina churches and never was really challenged much, from our churches to love people, like I said, outside of our circles. And but man, God has always just had on our hearts, has been impressing upon my hearts to love people right where they are. And so I remember, actually, there's this guy who's now a football coach here at the University of South Carolina. They just hired him this past year, and he's an African American guy. And I just remember, man, me and this coach. I don't want to say his name, but me and this coach, we were good friends in high school. He would come to my house and like spend the night and hang out, those kind of things. And God has always just been impressing on my heart that it is imperative for me as a follower of Jesus to love people who are different than I am, and maybe who might be marginalized in some way by our culture, by our society. And just that it's incumbent upon me to cross that divide and to love them and to welcome them into my circle, and then to place myself, through sympathy and empathy, into their shoes even as much as I can, and so. And I have not been perfect by any stretch of the imagination. So part of my story is, and this is really neat, man, how God, allows us to change, and he matures us, and then he challenges us and just kind of shapes our hearts, throughout the years. I grew up with a Confederate flag on my wall behind my bed. And I tell people this all the time. I told our church this on Long Island, that I didn't have it there because of Southern pride and heritage. I can guarantee you that. And so I say that to say God has taken this young guy that was just foolish in his thinking, foolish in his heart, and has through the years just shaped my heart to, I think, to resemble more of Christ's heart for people.
That is
And,
outstanding.
man, I remember like just like I said, that, you know, my friend in high school, God using that to kind of shape me and to transform my thinking in that way. I do remember in particular, man, being in seminary, and I'd never really spoken to an international person before, and we were in a missions class, and our professor showed us the video of this. And I don't want to say like what culture it was and, you know, what country it was, that kind of thing. But it was a video of a different nation. And it was in the video, it was showing people how they worshiped. I mean, I remember just sitting down and like in that classroom having tears in my eyes, and the Holy Spirit just saying, who's going to go?
Wow.
Like, who's going to go and tell them? Who's going to go and welcome this person in and go and speak to them? And so God began, like, he took that video and then began to open my eyes to the people who were in my little small town where I lived in South Carolina at the time.
Right.
And so we lived in a town, we lived in Kershaw, South Carolina, and I was the pastor of Kershaw Second Baptist Church. And I just remember, like, for the very first time seeing people in gas stations that own the gas stations that were different than me, and really seeing people for who they were. And then the Holy Spirit would just say, what are you going to do about it? And so I remember, like, going into the gas station where there were Indian gas station owners and workers,
Right.
and getting to know them. And then it got to be a burden for me, because I was like, man, they don't trust me. You know, I don't have really much in common with them. And so I was like, I got to go to India. I got to go to India so that I can have an opportunity just to really be able to say, hey, I've been where you're from. And so I went to India. I would come back and say, hey, man, I went to India. And so we started inviting these people into our home and sharing meals with them. They would invite us into their home and they would share a meal with us. And then I started seeing a pattern. I started seeing a pattern that some of the Indian people that I was getting to know were all from the same region in the same Pradesh or the same, you know, state in India. And so I was like, I got to go there. You know, I can't just go just to India. I've got to go actually to where they're from. And so I say all that to say, man, this has been a journey for me. But the one thing that God has really let us see and has shown us is that the more we do this, like I do it to try to be a blessing to other people, just to love them and welcome them into my country,
Right.
and into my life and my area, to make them feel valuable, to make them feel like they have somebody they can trust and know.
Right.
And so we began to see, like, we began to have our eyes open and to see all of these different people that are around us. Even in our little small town in Kershaw, there are 1,800 people. And so then on top of that, we began, like, we like Chinese food. And so we started going to the Chinese restaurant in Kershaw. There's one Chinese restaurant. And I remember going in there one day and God just saying, all right, so what are you going to do now? And, you know, you've been loving these Indian families. Now, what are you going to do with this Chinese family? And I said, all right, God, I'll keep going. And so I would call my order in, and then I would actually sit in the Chinese restaurant. People don't sit in the little Chinese restaurants in small towns. They usually get it to go. And I was like, I'm sitting in here. And those people, man, would not talk to me at all. Like, they just would not. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's just, you know, I smile usually all the time. And I don't know if they didn't trust me or if they thought I was trying to get something from them. And but I would still go in and sit there, and I would try to make small talk as much as I could possible. And so one night we called in our order after church on Sunday night, and the wife answered. because it was just a family running this by themselves. And I said, so when I found out she answered, I told my wife, I said, hey, May, which was the lady's name. I said, she answered, she's there tonight. You're going up there with me. And I had been praying that God would open a door. And I said, hey, I want you to go and speak to May. Maybe she might talk to you because Jack won't talk to me. May won't talk to me. And Robbie, I went in there and my wife was standing beside me. She can tell you this story just as well as I can too right now. And then Jack, for the very first time, actually addressed me, like when I walked in. And he said, hey, Jamie, I've been meaning to ask you, I wanted to ask you this question. And I thought, all right, well, yeah, anything, man, anything, Jack. He said, I wanted to know if you would teach me to read English because he was trying to get his green card.
Right.
And he was trying to get a citizenship. And I thought, like, immediately my mouth, like the bottom, I know I had to pick my jaw up off of the counter. I could not believe it. And so we got to know this family. They spent a lot of time, like their kids would walk down to our house and jump on our trampoline, and like we would have meals together with them. We got to know them so well. We actually said, hey, we don't like the food that you make at your house. and so when we would invite them to our house, we would cook them hamburgers, and they said, hey, we don't like your hamburgers either. And so we were like, yeah, that's cool. We really got to be good friends with them. But here's the one thing that really just opened my eyes up to the need to what's going on. This family was like no exaggeration, they were the only Asian family in our town.
Wow.
By themselves. And I remember Jack and May were at our house one night, and I said, Jack and May, how long have you been in America? And they had been here for 10 years. They had lived in Kershaw for 10 years. And I said, how many American homes have you been invited into in 10 years? And you know the answer.
Yes.
And unfortunately, I knew the answer, 0. That's exactly right. And so then I began to realize like how bad the problem is, and how different it is to actually love the stranger among us. And then through that, God has just, living on Long Island, you can't help but have people. There's a diverse background of people there.
Right.
Our church there was completely like it was there was no majority culture in our church. We were so mixed and so diverse. Right. And like I said, I mean, God is God has always used that to be a blessing to us.
Wow.
When we love those people, we think we're going out to love them, that we're going to be the blessing man, but I always receive the blessing from them much more than anything I could give them. And so that's kind of our journey with loving internationals. Now God has given us an opportunity. One of the things that brought us back from Long Island was being able to come to the University of South Carolina, where there are 2,000 international students. Right. And being able to come here and to love them in front of our students, our American students. Right. And to show them, man, that this should be the norm for us as followers of Jesus. That it shouldn't be anything that's abnormal for us. This should actually be the normal thing for us to do, to begin welcoming people into our life, and not just keeping them on the fringes and like saying, hey, I love you, but I'll only love you at arm's length. Right. But to say, man, come into my life. And let's, like, this is going to be messy, and it's going to be, there's going to be a lot of mix-ups and that kind of thing. But I am willing to love you, and I know that you're willing to love me. And what I found is, we pride ourselves on Southern hospitality, right? Us Southerners always say, man, we're the most hospitable people in the world. But I've learned that international hospitality leaves us in the dust, and so. It's always been a good encouraging for us to
Thank you so much, Jamie. What a great story. Talking more about your ministry to students, I know a lot has been happening with COVID and, different protocols that have come out from the government. And maybe you could speak a little bit about how the pandemic has affected your work with internationals, and maybe even some of the restrictions that have been put on some of the international students. And I know some of them have been sent home early and they were afraid. Why don't you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, there has been a lot of fear. I would say, Robbie, I think international students, I think they respect COVID more than my American friends do. I think there's probably a reason why COVID numbers are down in other countries and they're up still in America. But it is definitely, since COVID has come in, it's definitely harmed our ministry to internationals because of the reasons that you shared. Immediately, the government, President Trump put these restrictions, these travel restrictions in. I think that raised some fear and some anxiety levels towards people of other nationalities, and it began to build into just like like even this morning I was teaching some students from East Asia on Zoom because they're not ready to get back together again in person. They're here in Colombia, and so we were taking prayer requests, and one of them said, "Hey, I'm concerned about the government relationship between the American government and my government." And so I think there's some fear. I think there's some questions that have been raised. I assured them, and the one thing that I have learned is that sometimes politicians can cause trouble when it comes to international relationships. But what politicians do doesn't have anything to do with what the people on the ground, the real people who live there. I was sharing with them, we're all people. Right. And no matter what politicians do, that's them. Like, we're still going to love each other. And, right. and in me, you have a friend. Even this year at USC, they normally bring in 650 at least new international students every year. They're expecting they're gonna be dancing in the streets if they get 150 this year.
Wow, that is really sad.
And so even some of the ministries that actually have provided services to USC in the past, as far as picking up students. Yes. From the airport when they arrive, that has been shut down because that ministry was conducted by senior adults who are, the most prone to, becoming infected, and then that being a dangerous thing for them with COVID. Right. So that's actually opened up a door between us and our university now because of my ministry. Right. They reached out to me, or I reached out to them first and said, "Hey, we'll take that. We will assume that responsibility. Give us that." So it's provided some bridges for us between us and our university, but at the same time, Asian students in particular are just hesitant to come out, to be doing things in person. The university has placed restrictions on us to where we can't have more than 50 people at a time for gatherings, and so we do an international student luncheon every Thursday. Right. And so that's going to be limited to about 40 students and 10 volunteers every Thursday. Right. So it's definitely affected the way that we do ministry with our international students.
Well, let me ask you this question. You brought up a great point. You mentioned how, the policymakers, they have certain dictates that they come up with, but the people on the ground, like you and me, the citizenry, the church, businesses, law enforcement, the different communities on the ground that can respond immediately to some of the needs that are in our area. What do you feel like you'd like to say to the regular citizens like ourselves, the church, the regular American during this time of fear and COVID? How can we love the internationals and the immigrants and the refugees well that are in our midst? What would you want to say to that?
Hey, I would say, Robbie, that even our own president has. I think it's a terrible thing to call the coronavirus the Chinese virus, and using that language, I think, has raised even the fear level amongst Americans. Right. And it's made them. Unfortunately, you and I know people are mean. People are mean, and I think that's just I think it's caused Americans to be leery of especially Chinese people who are here in our country. And I would say, listen, I saw this tweet the other day that a friend of mine shared on Facebook, and he was sharing it from a pastor who's in New York City, and he said it's a curious evangelism strategy to look at the person that we ought to be sharing the gospel with, and to begin judging them before we ever see them. That's a curious evangelism strategy, right?
Right.
And so I would just say, listen, our job is to love everybody.
Right.
And I think sometimes we think, well, I don't hate them, so I obviously must love them. That's not what love is.
Right.
Love actually says, man, I am willing to put myself in harm's way to make sure and to see that you and your well-being are being taken care of above even my own needs.
Right.
And I would encourage the church, man, we have an opportunity we have an opportunity to let our Christ likeness and our light shine more than ever before. And light shines when it gets the darkest.
That's true.
And, a little light makes a huge difference in a dark area and in a dark room. And so we have a chance now to actually do what Jesus told us in Matthew chapter 5, where he says, let your light so shine before men that they might see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. And so when the average, or when Americans, and it's not the average American, but when Americans are looking at people and they're fearful and afraid to actually go to people who are different than them, especially in a time like this, as believers and followers of Jesus, we ought to be running into the fray and saying, hey, I'm here and I'm here to love you. So we have an opportunity that's set before us, I think, and I'm trying to take advantage of it.
That's awesome. I want to just ask you two more quick questions. I want to go back to last year when you and your ministry actually set up a partnership with local churches to adopt international students. And I think there were, 50 or 75 people that stepped forward and adopted international students. Could you speak a little bit about the positive experience that came out of that and maybe welcoming internationals that were in our community through that initiative?
Yeah, the people that have, I was blown away, number one, by how many people were willing to go through the teaching times that we put on for those, and just to be instructed, because we were asking people to do things they'd never done before. Right. And the people who did so, who have reported back to me, they are still in contact with their students. That's and I didn't have a single person say, man, I wish I wouldn't have done that. Everybody was saying, man, I wish I could have had more time to host more students. And so it was really one of the honors of being able to be a partner and a bridge builder between American Christians and these students that God had sent to us and trusted to us to be able to just say, hey, we get a chance to love them right here.
That is fantastic. Well, Jamie, the last question I'd like to ask you is, I've always just ended my interviews with this question. You're going to be speaking to a lot of people through this podcast, and I'd just like for you to say whatever you'd like to say to our country, to the church, based on your experience of working with internationals, with immigrants and refugees. What would you like to speak to the church or to our country right now? It's kind of a final statement.
Yeah, Robbie, I would just say we've got to be aware of our biases and be willing to put those things that maybe we were taught since childhood, since birth. If what we were taught by our parents or grandparents or by our culture or whatever it was that put these prejudices and these biases that that are in our hearts and our minds, if those things don't line up with what we see exemplified and manifested in the life of Jesus, we've got to push those things aside. We've got to call it for what it is. We've got to call it sin. And And then I would say, man, the one thing I see from the life of Jesus, and this is the one thing we've tried to adopt in our own life, Jesus is constantly eating with people who were not like himself, and so, people that other even religious people in his day would have looked down on and did look down on, Jesus was accused by those religious people of loving them, of, hanging out with those people. And I just thought, man, who am I hanging out with that the religious crowd, in our day and time would say, or the Pharisees or, the legalists would say, hey, why is Jamie hanging out with them? Well, it's because God loves them. And so I would just encourage you. I promise you, what you will find in internationals is if you will welcome them into your home and to have a meal with them, your mind will be blown, because they will say yes. According to their cultures, most of them, it's almost a slap in the face to say no to an invitation like that.
Uh-huh.
And I would say, if you were to do that, God would use that to change and to shape your heart, to bless you, to encourage you. And I got a feeling like if you were to do that, it would be a practice that you would never, ever stop doing for the rest of your life. And so that's who we are. And that's where we are now. And I just think everybody else would be the same way.
I really want to tell you how much I appreciate you and your heart and your family, and you truly are a bridge builder. And I know, just having known you for the last couple of years, I've appreciated so much your spirit and your love for everybody. And like you said, people on the margins, people from different cultures. You and I both are native South Carolinians, and we've grown up in a particular culture. And, because we're Christ followers, God has done something special in our hearts, and we are called to love everybody. And that certainly includes the strangers among us, those that are immigrants and refugees and internationals and sojourners, and, battle injustice and racism and all the things that are really keeping us from progressing in our society. And you're a great example of that. I look forward to working with you in the future. And I really want to thank you for your time today on our Let's Talk Immigration podcast. So God bless you, brother.
Hey, thank you, Robbie.